All right, let's go ahead and get started. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. We'll start by looking at how to set clear goals or targets for your job search so that you can move into the new year with intention and focus. Then we'll talk about building an action plan that guides your job search and outlines the steps that you'll take to move forward throughout your search. We'll explore additional approaches you can use to strengthen your marketability and position yourself as a strong candidate. Next, we'll cover key strategies for searching and applying effectively so that you can maximize your chances of landing a new role. And then after that, we'll walk through practical ways to prepare for interviews so that you can kind of put your best foot forward, so to speak. And then finally, we will close out with a live Q&A where you'll have a chance to ask your questions directly with one of our career experts. Okay, so let's get started by talking about the importance of defining your job search goals or target roles, what is often referred to as your what's next. And we'll walk through why this clarity matters and explore a few strategies that you can use to identify the roles or directions that make the most sense for you in your career. So the very first step when you're launching your job search should be to get clear on what you're actually looking for. Specifically, what type of role do you want to target? This kind of clarity matters because it's going to influence every other step that you take throughout your job search. And without this clarity, it's really easy to lose momentum. You might find yourself scrolling endlessly through job postings, kind of feeling like nothing is quite right and sending out applications without much confidence, struggling to clearly communicate your value to employers. So that lack of focus, that's going to make the process feel frustrating and overwhelming very quickly. So instead, you want to figure out your next path. And when you're thinking about your what's next, it's helpful to start by asking yourself whether you're aiming for a new job, a new company, or an entirely new career. A new job, that might make sense if you sort of generally like your field, but want to try something a bit different. So that could mean, targeting roles that are adjacent to your current position, maybe roles with a different focus, or even roles that are at a higher level that still use a lot of the same skills. And that could happen either within your current company or at a similar organization. Then a new company, that could be the right path if you enjoy what you do and you want to continue doing it, but maybe your circumstances have changed. Like maybe you experienced a layoff, or your current employer is no longer the right fit for you. And then in that case, you're often looking for a more lateral move, similar work, just in a new environment. And then an entirely new career, that usually comes into play when burnout is a factor, or when the work itself no longer feels fulfilling. And if that's where you are, it's especially important to take a close look at things like your interests and your values, along with the transferable skills you already have, so that you can identify other roles that might be a better long-term fit for you. Now, figuring out all of this isn't always easy, and sometimes it's hard to even know, what options are out there for you to consider. And that's why we encourage people to use a few different methods to help clarify their direction, starting with self-reflection. Self-reflection involves asking yourself questions like, what do I enjoy doing? What am I trying to avoid in my next role? What type of work makes me feel energized? And what type of work makes me dread the workday? What do I think I could realistically be good at, even if I haven't done it yet? Those types of questions, they can help you narrow the focus of your search and maybe identify some patterns that sort of point you in a clear direction. And if you're considering a career change, or feel unsure about what type of role to target, I do also want to mention that I've included a free resource in the handout section called How to Choose a New Career, the 4-step system. It walks you through some structured self-reflection questions like the ones I just mentioned, and it can be a helpful place for you to start, determining your right path or your what's next. Another option is taking career or skills assessments. These can help you uncover, strengths, interests, or work preferences that you might not have fully considered or even realized on your own. And a lot of assessments also suggest potential career paths that you could take based on your results in that assessment. And that can, lead you to things that you can then research further on your own. And I will mention our four-step system. It does include links to several free assessments if you're interested in exploring that approach. You can also use different AI tools like ChatGPT or Google Gemini to help you brainstorm and explore potential options. For example, you could ask an AI tool something like, I've been a teacher for over 10 years, but I'm looking to make a change. What are some career options outside of education that could be a good fit for me? Or you could ask, I've worked in tech sales for the last 5 years and I want to grow my career. What paths forward should I consider? And when you're using AI tools, the more relevant context that you provide, the better your results are going to be. So, you can mention things like things you want to avoid, areas that specifically interest you, or skills you enjoy using. All of those types of things will provide helpful details that the AI tool can use to refine its response. And you want to think of the results that the AI tool gives you as kind of a starting point, just a way to kind of generate ideas to research then further on your own. And you can even ask the AI tool directly some follow-up questions to kind of dive deeper into any of the options it mentions that catch your attention. And then as you start narrowing down the path that feels like it could be right for you, informational interviews can be incredibly valuable. And an informational interview that involves connecting with people who are already doing the type of work you're interested in or working at companies that you admire, and then asking if they'd be open to sharing insights about their career, lessons learned, or advice that they might have for someone who's trying to break into that role. Because hearing directly from people in the field, that can give you clarity that you won't get from just a job description alone. Now, that being said, it is important to approach informational interviews thoughtfully and authentically, just like you should with any type of networking. You don't want to just spam strangers for favors or requests. Instead, you want to make sure that you are, showing genuine interest in other people and attempting to kind of engage with them on a real level and establish a relationship, a professional relationship that hopefully can be, mutually beneficial. And we'll talk about this more on a later slide, but these are some essential basics, ideas to kind of keep in mind when, trying to pursue informational interviews or just networking in general. And then one additional strategy, even though it's not listed here directly on this slide, is simply reading job descriptions. You don't have to search by job title alone. You can also search using different skills that you already have, and then see what roles come up and review those roles. And then as you read through descriptions, pay attention to what kind of tasks and responsibilities and environments and job titles stand out to you, because then that can give you ideas to then research or pursue further. But ultimately, the key takeaway here is that understanding your what's next before fully diving into your job search, that's going to allow you to move forward with focus and intention and make every other step of your job search process easier and more effective. Okay, so once you have determined your what's next, it's then helpful to develop an action plan to guide you through your job search. And a great place to start when building out your action plan is with more in-depth research. Research helps you better understand what your target audience, meaning potential employers, actually find attractive in prospective candidates. So by digging into your field of choice, you can learn sort of the nuances of the roles that you're targeting, the skills that are maybe highly valued in that field, and even things like the terminology and the language and the jargon that employers tend to use. All of that information is going to make it much easier to market yourself effectively, which is why research is such an important foundation for putting into your action plan. And then as you begin to actively launch your job search, it's also important to intentionally tap into your network. You want to start with people that you already know. You'll let them know that you're searching, what type of roles you're targeting, and what you're hoping to move towards in your career, because they might have, advice, insights, or ideas that you might not have uncovered on your own. And you can also expand your network by trying to identify new connections. These are people who are already doing the type of work that you want to be doing or working at your companies of interest. That can help you, begin to build valuable relationships so that you can gather inside information and maybe even, lead you to a referral for an open role in the future. Networking often provides your support and opportunities that don't come from job postings alone. So it really is an essential part of any strong action plan. Another key step to include in your action plan is updating your job search assets. These are things like your resume, your cover letter, online profiles, and any other materials that you might use, like maybe a portfolio of your work. You want to be sure that you are, presenting your skills, experience, and value in a way that is relevant to your current target audience. And it's important to remember that your past audience isn't necessarily the same as your current one. So your materials might need to be recalibrated. And we'll talk more about tailoring application materials for individual roles later. But even at this early stage, this action planning stage, you want to keep your target roles in mind as you update your documents so that they are aligned with what employers or your target audience are looking for. And your action plan should also include ways to maybe increase your visibility, which is where your online presence, especially LinkedIn, can really work in your favor. Increasing your visibility means doing things that attract positive attention from others in your industry. And that can look like, following relevant professionals and companies online, commenting on posts that are related to, your area of interest or expertise, sharing industry articles, or even creating your own posts around topics that are connected to your role. And these kinds of activities, they help you start to forge meaningful connections, and they can also catch the attention of recruiters and hiring managers who use platforms like LinkedIn or other social media to search for potential candidates. And then finally, keep in mind that all of these steps really are not one and done tasks. You can and should continue refining them throughout your job search. There are always, opportunities to improve your approach and increase your competitiveness, as you move forward. All right, so let's now talk about some alternative strategies that you can employ to increase your job prospects and improve your marketability. Chances are good that a lot of you are already using at least some of these strategies, but if you're feeling stuck, maybe running into roadblocks, or simply looking for ways to just increase your chances of success, these are all strong options to consider. So first, let's talk about upskilling and reskilling. With a bit of research and a clear understanding of your desired career path, you can usually identify specific skills or maybe industry tools that you don't yet have, but that could make you more marketable. So when you identify those, you can then explore ways to build or strengthen those skills through things like, online courses, certificate programs, or training opportunities. And, some programs, training programs and things like that can be expensive. There are many affordable, budget-friendly alternatives available. So this doesn't have to be sort of an all or nothing investment. Keep in mind that even small skill upgrades can make a meaningful difference in how competitive you are. Something as simple as, watching a tutorial of a specific software program on YouTube, and maybe downloading the free version of it so that you can, explore it yourself. That allows you to add a new skill to your technology skills section on your resume, as an example. So even those small upgrades can make a big difference. Another effective way to improve your marketability is through volunteer opportunities. Volunteering in roles where you can apply your skills in a professional setting or learn new skills, that allows you to gain hands-on relevant experience. And volunteer work absolutely belongs on your resume. So as an example, maybe you've recently learned a new skill through like a course or some independent learning. You can then seek out like a nonprofit that might benefit from that skill and volunteer your time on a project that they might not otherwise have the resources to take on. That approach can be especially helpful if you're trying to make a career change, and it can also lead to some valuable networking connections. In some cases, people that you work with through volunteer roles, like often you have a volunteer supervisor, they might even be willing to serve as a reference for you in the future, especially if it's a more longer term volunteer project or volunteer opportunity. It's also worth considering freelancing or gig work. Similar to volunteering, this type of work allows you to build experience, but it also provides income, whereas volunteering obviously does not. Freelance or project-based roles can help you fill employment gaps, demonstrate your adaptability and your initiative, and show employers that you're proactive about staying engaged in your field while also job searching. Job shadowing and informational interviewing, those are additional strategies that can be very effective. We've touched on this a bit already, so I won't go into a ton of detail here, but both of these are great ways to kind of learn directly from people in the field, build relationships, and increase your visibility. And over time, the connections that you establish, that can open doors to other opportunities that you might not have found on your own. You can also improve your marketability by working on personal projects or passion work. Creating your own projects, that gives you a way to showcase your skills and add hands-on experience to things like, maybe your portfolio or a blog or your LinkedIn profile or even your resume. And it also shows initiative and commitment to your field, and it gives you concrete examples to talk about in interviews, especially when you're asked about skills or experience that you haven't had yet in a formal role. And then lastly, consider joining professional associations or organizations related to your field. Being an active member in different organizations, that can help you build your network and gain insider knowledge about industry trends. And a lot of organizations offer, webinars and workshops and conferences that can support your professional development and your upskilling efforts. And membership in organizations, that can also strengthen your resume, particularly if you take on a leadership role or contribute in some type of visible way. And now, taken together, all of these strategies give you kind of multiple ways to increase your marketability, even if you're not currently in your ideal role, and they allow you to stay proactive and forward moving throughout your job search. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is actually searching and applying for new jobs. I know that sounds like a simple concept on its surface, but there are definitely some important best practices that you can and should be using in order to maximize your chances of success. So we'll start with some of the primary methods that people use to job search. And really the primary one these days is using online job boards. When you're using online job boards, there are a few important things to keep in mind. It's smart to not limit yourself to one job board only because different employers post on different sites. So you could be missing out on opportunities if you solely rely on one single board. Also, it's a good idea to look for some niche job boards or job boards that kind of specialize in a specific type of work or industry. For example, FlexJobs specializes in jobs that offer some type of remote, hybrid, or flexible working arrangement. So considering searching for niche job boards that align with your interests, that is a good idea to kind of expand this primary method of your job search plan. And it's also a good idea when you're using job boards to leverage whatever type of advanced search features and filters are offered so that you can find roles that closely align to your specific needs, interests, and preferences. The next method that you can and should consider is often referred to as the reverse job search. Essentially, what you do in the reverse job search is research and identify companies that you would really like to work with for whatever reason, and then create a list of target employers. From there, you can aim to kind of learn as much as possible about the company. You can follow the company online and engage with their social media profiles. You can bookmark the company hiring page so that you regularly check it to see if they're hiring for roles that align with your skills and experience. And you can work to connect with and build relationships with people that already work there, which brings us to our next method on this slide, which is networking. And I know we've touched on this a little bit already, but I want to be a bit more detailed here. But networking, when it's done the right way, it does take time because you need to lay some groundwork, which is something that I've hinted at already, but I want to expand upon. So at its most basic level, networking is essentially building and maintaining relationships with other professionals. And these can be people that you already know or have directly met through, work or in-person events, or it can be others that you find through a social media platform like LinkedIn, or from another networking connection. Maybe you're introduced. And when you're job searching, it's a good idea to let some trusted members of your existing network know about it. They might be able to give you some solid advice, maybe notify you of open roles that you didn't find on your own, or connect you with others who could help you even further, or maybe even give you a referral to an open job at their company. But it's also a good idea to connect your networking efforts to your target companies or your target roles that we've talked about, which is where a tool like LinkedIn can be a tremendous help because it gives you potential access to so many more people than you would likely ever meet in person. And using the search bar at the top of LinkedIn, you can pretty easily find people who are doing the type of work that you want to be doing. And using a company's profile on LinkedIn, you can pretty easily find people who work for those organizations. So as you identify people that you want to connect with, you can then follow those people on LinkedIn. There are two types of connections. You can kind of follow people or you can connect with people. Following is a bit more surface level. It's a good place to start. Connections tend to be a bit deeper, a bit more intimate. So you want to wait a little bit until you've established, a relationship with them. So, when you follow people, you can, see the content that they post. You can, engage with their content, meaning you like and comment on their posts, and you can increase your visibility with them, and then eventually reach out to them with a connection request. And this is the type of thing that, you want to do slowly over time, kind of showing your genuine appreciation in the things that they share, or the knowledge and the experience that they possess. That's how you start to build the relationship. Because remember, that relationship needs to be at the forefront of your networking efforts. And then after you start to cultivate and establish that relationship and continue to nurture it through consistent engagement, then you can eventually make sort of a small request of that person, like seeing if they'd be willing to answer some questions about their type of work or their company. And as you continue engaging with people in this way, you then can kind of naturally start to share about your own goals and your own professional interests. And then these people can potentially help you just like your existing network could by giving you advice, connecting you with someone new, pointing out job openings, or even giving you a referral to an open job at their company. But like I said, networking takes time and the benefits really aren't realized overnight, but it definitely is a strategy that you do not want to neglect, especially in a competitive job market where applications alone might not cut it. And if you continue maintaining your network over time, even when you are employed, you'll be prepared for future job searches too. So really do not neglect your network. It's an essential part of the job search process. And so that's, just a basic strategy for networking because it is a topic that we really could talk about for hours. So if you are interested in applying networking as a strategy more effectively, do make sure that you check out some of the resources in the handout section here in this webinar. All right, so as we're talking about searching and applying for jobs, I do want to take a moment to address job scams because unfortunately they are a very real part of our modern job search. The most important thing to understand about job scams is that scammers ultimately they want your money. And that might happen through, getting you to send them a direct payment or by collecting sensitive personal information from you that allows them to steal from you later, like through identity theft. And keeping that end goal in mind, that can help you spot warning signs more quickly. But on this slide, you'll see some of the most common red flags and warning signs to watch out for. So let's walk through some of these briefly. And the first warning sign or red flag is offers that sound too good to be true. This is really one of the oldest and most common scam tactics because it works. Jobs that promise, unusually high pay for very little effort or very few hours, those simply don't exist in legitimate hiring markets. But get rich quick schemes have been around for a long time, and scammers continue to rely on them because people still fall for them. Next, watch out for any request to pay an application fee. Legitimate employers do not charge candidates to apply for jobs. So if someone is asking you to submit a fee in order to apply or move forward in the process, that's a very strong indicator that you're dealing with a potential scam. Another major red flag is requests for sensitive personal information, especially early in the application or interview process. Legitimate employers might ask for basic details at the application stage, like your education, your location, your date of birth, maybe your references, your work history, things like that. But information like your social security number, your driver's license number, or your bank account details, those should only be requested after you've accepted an official offer and are completing formal onboarding paperwork, typically through a secure document signing platform. And a related warning sign is being asked to use a company's private VPN, or if someone is telling you to click on an unrecognizable link to complete an application. Because in a lot of cases, this is actually an attempt to access your computer or get you to download malware in order to steal sensitive information from you, including passwords that could allow them to steal your identity down the road. And that last point that I mentioned, that's why it's always best and safest to apply for a job directly on a company's actual website. So do keep that in mind. You also want to be cautious of unsolicited job offers. It's not unusual for recruiters to reach out to people if they maybe, find your resume on a job board or your profile on LinkedIn, and encourage you to apply for a role, but they don't offer you the job outright. There should always be a formal application and interview process. So if someone contacts you out of the blue with a job offer and you never applied for that job, and they haven't, done anything to vet you, that's a major red flag. Another common tactic scammers use is creating sort of an overwhelming sense of urgency. The goal here is to pressure you into acting quickly so that you don't have time to think critically. So when you're rushed, for example, maybe you're being told that you need to act fast before the opportunity goes away, you're more likely to overlook warning signs like requests for sensitive information or unexpected fees. And finally, pay close attention to the interview process itself. If you never have any type of face-to-face interaction with the employer, that should raise your level of caution. Legitimate roles involve a structured interview process and don't rely solely on text-based communication. Now, it is worth noting that some employers might use a text-based interview or chat as an initial screening step instead of a phone screen. However, there should still be some form of live interaction later in the process, whether that's an in-person meeting or a video interview with cameras on. If the entire process is text-based, or if you're offered a role after only a brief call without ever seeing or speaking to someone face-to-face, or several someones, usually you interview with more than just one person, that is a strong indicator that something is off. And as I mentioned earlier, job scams are an unfortunate but very real part of today's job search landscape. So staying informed, trusting your instincts, and knowing these red flags, that can go a long way in protecting yourself. All right, now let's talk about some important tips for when you actually start applying for roles. In today's competitive market, a one size fits all resume and cover letter isn't going to cut it anymore. If you want to stand out, it is crucial that you tailor and customize your application materials for each role that you apply to. Tailoring your materials that allows you to present your skills, experience, and accomplishments in a way that is meaningful to recruiters and hiring managers, which significantly increases your chances of being invited to an interview. Now, tailoring does take time, and it takes more time, obviously, than simply sending off the same resume for every application. But taking a quality over quantity approach, that's going to help employers see your value more clearly and improve your response rate in your job search. Plus, I'll give you some tips here in a moment to help you speed up the tailoring process. But the first step in tailoring your materials effectively is, like we talked about before, thinking about your audience, meaning those recruiters and hiring managers looking to fill your target roles, and thinking about what's going to be most relevant to them. Relevance is key. And to figure that out, the job description should be your primary guide. I often compare the job description to like a cheat sheet. Employers are essentially giving you the answers to the test and they want you to use them. So pay close attention to what they're looking for in a candidate and then show how your background aligns with those needs and priorities that they've outlined. Also, when it comes to your resume, it's important to go beyond simply listing responsibilities or skills. Instead, you want to focus on showing your impact. So try to highlight outcomes, results, and accomplishments that demonstrate, not just what you did, but how you did it successfully in a professional setting. You can kind of think of it as sort of a show, don't just tell approach. And because job descriptions can sometimes be dense or unclear, AI tools can be incredibly helpful in tailoring your materials. For example, you might use a prompt like, based on the following job description, what are the top needs and priorities of the employer hiring for this role? And then you could paste in the job description and let the tool summarize it for you. You still want to review the job description yourself, but AI can help ensure you're not missing key themes or requirements that you might want to make sure you incorporate into your resume and cover letter. Now, a strategy that I personally use that can help make tailoring your materials much easier and far less time consuming is what I like to call the master resume strategy. When I'm job searching, I typically identify, 2 to 4 target roles or fields that I'm focusing on in my search. And then I create 2 to 4 master resumes, each one specifically geared towards one of my target roles. This makes it so I already have a resume that is tailored in a broad sense to my different audiences. I still include all the same jobs and experiences on each one of those master resumes, but the way that I describe those roles, including, which skills that I highlight, which accomplishments I emphasize, and even the order of my bullet points, that's going to change based on the audience. And then when I find a job I want to apply for, I pick the most relevant master resume, I make a copy of it, and then I tailor it even further for that specific role, focusing my tailoring efforts primarily on the professional summary at the top of the resume and making sure I'm aligning it very closely with the job description. And then I'll do a quick review of my bullet points to see if anything needs, maybe a stronger emphasis or reordering. But, by using this approach, I avoid starting from scratch every time, and it saves a significant amount of time while still allowing me to submit a resume that's clearly aligned with the priorities of the employer. And that balance, that balance is a key when you're applying to multiple roles. Okay, so no job search webinar would be complete without some discussion about job interviews and some effective preparation strategies. So let's get into that now. The first thing you want to do as you begin preparing for an interview is to take a step back and think about the process you're actually going to be going through. So start by considering what stage of the interview process you are likely in. Is this a first round interview or a later round interview? First round interviews are typically shorter and are often conducted over the phone or as a one-way interview. Their main purpose is to determine whether you meet the basic requirements and are worth moving forward. And because it tends to be more of a screening stage, your responses in the first round should be clear and concise. You want to show that you understand the role, can explain how your experience aligns with the role, and demonstrate some enthusiasm for the position and the company. Later round interviews, they tend to be longer and are usually conducted either in person or via video chat. These interviews focus on evaluating your deeper qualifications as well as your cultural fit and how you could contribute to the team. And in later rounds, it's important to use more detailed examples and stories from your past to illustrate your fit. And we'll talk more about how to do that on the next slide specifically. You'll also want to think about the type of interview you're facing, meaning, is it a technical or performance-based interview that might involve completing a task, an exercise, or an assessment? Or is it maybe more behavioral or competency-based and focus on things like how you've handled situations in the past or how you would approach certain scenarios that are related to the specific role? Understanding that sort of format ahead of time, that's going to allow you to prepare more strategically. Another important consideration is the interview environment. Interviews can take place over the phone, through a one-way platform, in person, or via video conferencing, and each environment comes with its own nuances. For example, in an in-person interview, you'll want to plan your route ahead of time, your travel route ahead of time to make sure that you are arriving on time for the interview. For a video interview, it's important to test your technology, confirm that you have a reliable internet connection, and make sure your environment is quiet and professional. Being mindful of these details, they can help you feel more confident and avoid unnecessary stress on the day of your interview. And regardless of the interview type or the environment, professionalism should always be front and center. This includes arriving or logging in 5 to 10 minutes early, thoroughly researching the company, dressing appropriately, and practicing good manners. Clear communication, active listening, balancing confidence with humility, and handling potentially sensitive or negative topics with tact, those all say a lot about your character and how you would show up as an actual employee. And the same level of professionalism should carry through to your post-interview etiquette. Be sure to send a thank you email within 24 hours, respond to any follow-up communication promptly and courteously, and maintain professionalism regardless of the outcome. And once you've taken the time to understand the interview process and what to expect, you can then move on to more tangible interview preparation steps, and that's what we'll focus on here on this next slide. So when it comes to some of this more tangible, higher level interview preparation, these are some key elements you'll want to be sure you include once you have an interview scheduled. And the most important part of your preparation is making sure you fully understand the role and how your skills and experience align with the role. Once again, the job description should be your primary guide here. And one approach that I like personally is printing out the job description or maybe pasting it into a Word document and then going line by line, kind of jotting notes in the margin about times when I've done the exact things listed or very similar things. That helps me, kind of clearly see how my experience matches the role. It's also important to be prepared to talk about the things you haven't done. Employers don't expect candidates to meet 100% of the requirements, but if you're asked about a skill or experience that you don't have, you should be ready to discuss something comparable that you have done or explain how you would approach that situation based on your research and your understanding of the role. Along those same lines, you'll want to prepare specific examples and stories from your past that demonstrate your fit for this specific position. Because whenever possible, you want to back up your answers with real examples that show your skills in action and highlight the impact that you've made. For instance, if you're asked about maybe your greatest strength and you simply say problem solving, that doesn't give the interviewer much to work with. Instead, tell a story about a problem you identified and how you approach solving it and the positive outcome that resulted. Using the job description as your guide, you should aim to develop 5 to 10 solid stories from your past experiences that clearly illustrate why you'd be a strong fit for the role. It can also be really helpful to think about questions you might be asked ahead of time, not so that you can, script the perfect response, but so you can get your mind thinking in the right direction and feel more confident walking into that interview. And that includes both common interview questions and role or industry specific ones. And this is another area where AI tools can be incredibly useful. You can paste the job description into an AI tool and ask something like, based on the following job description, what are 20 interview questions I might be asked for this role? And then reviewing those questions, that can help you identify themes and prepare relevant talking points and examples, especially the stories we just discussed. But again, the goal isn't memorization, it's preparation, because there's no guarantee you'll actually be asked any of those specific questions, but it'll get you thinking about the topics that might arise during that interview. And then finally, you want to prepare questions to ask the interviewer. Most interviews end with, "Do you have any questions for us?" And you want to be ready for that moment. You want to avoid asking questions that could easily be answered with basic research. And I also generally recommend holding off on questions about things like salary, benefits, or time off until an offer is actually on the table. Instead, try to focus on questions that show your interest in performing the role well and understanding the company better. For example, I like to ask how success will be measured for someone in this role because it helps clarify expectations. If company culture matters to you, you could ask about how the organization supports work-life balance or invests in employee development. I usually prepare 8 to 10 questions ahead of time, knowing that some of them will likely be answered during the interview. And that way I can choose the most relevant 3 to 4 questions to ask while still being respectful of everyone's time. Preparing thoroughly for interviews is essential if you want to feel confident and perform at your best. So hopefully these tips help you approach your next interview feeling more prepared and more capable of landing that new role. Okay, so before we move on to your questions, here are a few key reminders and action steps to take with you moving forward. The first is to take time to clearly define your what's next so you can approach your job search with specific goals, target roles, and companies in mind. Then make sure that you do your research to ensure you're running a fully informed job search, which will help you stay focused and avoid wasting time on roles that aren't a good fit for you. You also want to look for ways to strengthen your marketability, whether that's through upskilling, volunteering, freelancing, or gaining experience in adjacent areas. You also want to use multiple best practices and job search strategies like job boards, reverse job searching, and networking to expand your reach and increase your chances of success. Then remember to always tailor your application materials to the position by using the job description as your guide and keeping the employer's perspective front and center. And then prepare thoroughly for your interviews and consistently follow up so that you can present yourself as a strong fit and leave a positive, lasting impression. When you approach your job search with intention and consistency, you're going to put yourself in a much stronger position to land the right role. Okay, so as a reminder, a copy of the recording as well as resources presented today will be emailed out to everyone within the next week. Do be sure to check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered there. For even more tips, tricks, and resources, I recommend going to the FlexJobs blog. You'll see the URL there on the screen. It includes a vast amount of free articles and resources for members and non-members alike. Now let's go ahead and open up to your questions. Please remember to type those questions in the Q&A area rather than the chat section, and feel free to give a thumbs up to anyone else's question you would also like to hear answered so we know which questions are the most popular. All right, everyone, we are going to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar now. Before we dive into your questions, could someone just confirm for me quickly in the chat section that you can hear me clearly? A simple yes will suffice. I always like to verify that before I start answering questions. All right, wonderful. Thank you very much. So once again, my name is Keith Spencer. and I am one of our career experts here at FlexJobs, and I will be answering your questions for you. So let's move over to that Q&A section together. And our first question here that has the highest number of upvotes, this person shared that they recently had a recruiter reach out to them on LinkedIn after they sent their resume over. And the recruiter said that they scored low on the applicant tracking system and their resume wouldn't make it to an actual human. They worked on their resume with a job coach and spent quite a bit of time on updating their resume. Do you think this could have been a scam? She was trying to sell her coworker services to update my resume so it'd score higher on an ATS. So yes, unfortunately, this was very likely a scam that you encountered. This is a common scam tactic that we have been seeing nowadays where, this quote unquote recruiter says, I'm sorry, the ATS can't read your resume or it's not scoring appropriately or something like that. We'll talk a little bit more about ATS here in a moment. And then they offer to sell you some type of service in order to make your resume ATS compliant or score effectively, when it's all, just sort of a story they are trying to sell you, I'll say. So unfortunately, yes, this is a scam. I do not recommend buying these services from this individual. Applicant tracking systems, I do want to clear some things up here about applicant tracking systems. They are essentially what you can consider to be a recruiter or a hiring manager's digital filing cabinet. Okay. So people often try to sell you on this idea that your resume needs to, beat the ATS or in this instance, achieve an appropriate score so that, humans will actually see your resume. And, that's not entirely accurate. There are a lot of different ATS out there, so I don't want to speak in absolutes here, but for the most part, the ATS is just compiling and organizing applications for open roles for that recruiter or that hiring team or that human resources department. So there are some applicant tracking systems that can scan resumes and perhaps assign some type of a score to your resume, but knowledgeable and experienced hiring teams and recruiters take those scores with a grain of salt, because really those scores would rely solely on specific keywords that appear in your resume. And if you fall into that trap of wanting to achieve a high score without providing context and background, then you fall into the trap of what we call keyword stuffing, which is not a good way to make it through the actual application process. Because you might have a lot of keywords in there and you might get a good score, again, if they are having it screen and score resumes, but then your resume isn't going to make a lot of sense once a human does actually read it. So try not to put too much stock into this idea of I need to get a good score on my resume, because again, not many recruiters are actually doing that. Not many ATS are actually offering that as an option for recruiters. So instead, focus on what we talked about in the webinar about thinking about your audience, analyzing job descriptions so you understand what their needs, what their priorities are, and then speak to those things in your application materials. And if you do this, then you will just naturally end up using the keywords, the phrases, the language, the jargon that you see in job descriptions. So you kind of naturally make sure that those keywords will appear. And the reason that keywords are important, because I don't want to give the impression that it's not important. I just don't want you to get hung up on this idea of I need to beat the ATS or I need to score high. But the reason the keywords are important is because most ATS have a search function in them. So if I'm a recruiter and I get 1,000 applicants for a job and I can't possibly look at 1,000 resumes all by myself, what I might do is I might think about what are my top kind of qualifications here for this role? Like maybe there's a specific bachelor's degree I want you to have, or a specific certification I want candidates to have. I could go into my ATS, into my database, and search by the name of that certification, and then narrow down my pool to just those applicants that possess that certification or have that certification on their resume. So take that kind of thing with a grain of salt. Really, I just encourage you to focus on thinking about your audience, and then, like I said, that matching keywords and speaking to their needs and priorities will kind of come naturally as you think about your audience, analyze job descriptions, and tailor your application materials accordingly. But again, do not pursue buying this ATS optimization service that this person is trying to sell you, because if it's not a scam, it at least is a service that isn't going to get you very far. But chances are good that it could certainly be a scam. So hopefully that is helpful information for you. Next one here. So this person is asking, are gaps in your resume a main concern, knowing the economy in the last 5 years post-COVID has been impacted? So yeah, this is another really good question. And this is often, I talk about this fairly frequently, and I try to speak delicately here, because it's hard to say that there were any positives coming out of the global pandemic that we all went through. But if you can think of any positives that do exist, it is the normalization of career breaks and employment gaps in context of hiring in the job market. Because as you are alluding to here, COVID, lots of people were furloughed, lots of people lost their jobs, lots of companies shut down. So a lot of people now have employment gaps, have career breaks on their resume. So it is okay now, at least in the eyes of the majority of people who are in hiring, to have career breaks. Now, that being said, you do want to make sure that you are addressing your career break proactively and tactfully. Because if you just have a gap in employment with no explanation on your resume, it is still easy for people to see that and start to imagine red flags that don't actually exist. So I would encourage you, I'm going to point your direction to your attention to the resources section here in this webinar. And in the resources, that first one that says, FlexJobs maintains this library of samples. In those samples, there are sample career break entries that you could put on your resume. And, I mentioned you want to explain them tactfully. So what I mean by that is, don't overshare, just kind of give them the basic information they need to have in order to, understand that you had a gap in your employment. And then if you had the ability or the desire to kind of leverage that to your advantage, you could also tuck things into there that emphasize ways that you stayed professionally active during that time. Like, for example, a lot of people have career breaks because they took time off to, care for their children. And a lot of times parents will, volunteer or things like that. Or sometimes when people have a career break, they take some online courses, or they do some freelancing or some contract work, or maybe they earn a certification. All of those things could also be described in your career break. So you could say, let's say you hypothetically lost your job because of your company shut down or something like that, or your company changed their strategy or something. You would say, one of several laid off due to a change in company strategy, excited and energized to return to the workforce. And you could just leave it at that, or you could have additional bullet points describing the things you did to stay professionally active. So, you definitely have options there. And like I said, career breaks, to answer the root of your question, once again, have been a bit normalized nowadays. So that is certainly a good thing, because, career breaks are normal. There's no reason to kind of turn your nose up at them or imagine, negative things about someone just because they have their career break. So again, that's one of the few silver linings that you could probably pull from that global pandemic we all experienced. Okay, so next one here, how do you incorporate a career change in a cover letter if a cover letter is required? So yeah, your cover letter is a good place to, talk about a career change. You could also talk about that in the summary section, or at least a little bit in the summary section of your resume, or you could talk about it in both places. And the way that you would do this, it can kind of vary, depend on your where you're coming from, your writing style, what sort of tone you're trying to strike in your cover letter. But you could, just sort of simply phrase it as, while I have spent most of my career doing blank, I am now searching for positions in blank because, and then make sure to have some reasons there. And in terms of your reasons, you want to focus primarily on what I often refer to as pull factors. What is pulling you towards this new type of career that you're pursuing, rather than push factors, the factors that are pushing you away from what you previously did. So, you could just kind of simply state it. I'm now focusing on this because of these reasons, even though I did, these things previously in my career. And then make sure that you are, bridging the gap. Focus on, your transferable skills. Focus on the things that you did that are related. Focus on, again, what's important to your audience. What would be relevant to this new audience from the things that you previously did in your career. So that is the approach that I would recommend. And again, you could do that either in the cover letter. You could do it a little bit in your summary section on your resume. And then you also want to be prepared to talk about it in greater detail during an interview, because it's typically, employers, when you're making a career change, they want to make sure that you would actually be in it for the long haul, that you're making an informed decision, and you're not going to just jump back to what you previously did immediately when you find out, if you find out that it's not necessarily for you. They want to make sure that you've done that research ahead of time and are confident that this new change is for you. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, so next one here. This person is sharing that they had a recruiter ask them to change their resume to match their LinkedIn profile. Their resume is focused more on the past, and LinkedIn is focused more on what they want next. They felt like this was wrong. Is this common? Does it make sense? So yeah, your question does make sense. And I kind of understand where the recruiter is coming from. Keep in mind, like, your approach to your LinkedIn is what you want it to be, or it should be what you want it to be. Now, that being said, there should be some cohesion between your resume and your LinkedIn. So, if putting myself in the mind of this recruiter, and I'm going to make some assumptions here that might not be accurate, but if I read your resume and then I went to your LinkedIn and there wasn't any overlap and it didn't really make sense, and it was to the point where it seemed like it could be for two different people, then I might have an issue. But if you are future focused in your LinkedIn, but still have the same jobs listed, and still talk about the skills you leveraged and the things you accomplished, and focus on your relevant transferable skills and things like that, and I can see the overlap, I can see the cohesion, then I wouldn't really have an issue with that. Your LinkedIn, out of necessity, is going to be broader and focused on a wider audience, whereas your resume is going to be more narrow and focused on one specific audience. Each copy of your resume is going to be focused on specific audiences. So out of necessity, you're going to have a broader LinkedIn. But again, it should make sense. When I see your resume and when I see your LinkedIn, I should be able to easily say, yep, this is the same person, clearly is the same person. They just are describing their experience a little bit differently, depending on which job search asset I am looking at. So hopefully that makes sense. And you can kind of reassess your LinkedIn and your resume to make sure that they are aligned, but no, they don't need to be identical. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Thank you for asking that question. We're going to try to squeeze in at least one more question here. We're getting close to that hour mark. But this person is sharing that a repeated problem that they have encountered is with the 8 jobs that they have interviewed for one specific company in the past year, is that they're getting a rejection email after the interview, and they're never told why they weren't chosen, and they have no avenue of communication to even ask. So because of this, they have no idea at all what to do differently the next time so that they can succeed. Excuse me, tripping over my words a little bit. So this situation that you're describing makes me feel as though there's something going on with your interview style or your interview preparation or your delivery in interviews that isn't resonating with the hiring teams. Because clearly, if this same company has pulled you in for 8 job interviews, I'm assuming that it's been for some different positions, maybe not 8 different positions, but they've pulled you in multiple times. They like something about your experience. They like your resume. They see the value in you, but it's just not clicking when you get to the interview. And I understand the frustration when you're saying, I'm not getting any feedback. I don't have any way to even ask for that feedback. But even if you had a way to ask for that feedback from that company, chances are good they're not going to give you any feedback. And this is a common frustration for job seekers. They say, "Oh, I interviewed with this company. They rejected me. I asked why, and they just gave me, kind of a stock answer that wasn't helpful, or they didn't respond, or whatever." Companies often aren't going to give you feedback because it opens them up to liability. What if they said something that you interpreted as discriminatory, and now all of a sudden you want to, sue them or something like that? So oftentimes they are very generic when you ask for feedback, and I don't even bother asking for feedback myself. So what I would do in this situation is think about, okay, do I know anybody, have any friends, have any former coworkers who have hiring experience who would be willing to do a mock interview with me? Or maybe even ask a career coach. You could hire a career coach to do a mock interview for you, because something is going wrong in the interview stage that is causing you to not get not advance in the search process or land a job with that company. And if that person that you do a mock interview with, or maybe you do a couple mock interviews, and they say, "No, you're doing great, like, I really don't understand," then maybe it's just time to move on from that company. Maybe they've just decided for whatever reason that it's a mismatch, and you don't want to continue wasting your time with that company. But in seeing this question or this situation that you are describing here, the first thing that pops to my mind is we need to work on interviewing, and a mock interview, I think, would be appropriate for you. So hopefully that, coupled maybe with some of the advice in the presentation about interview preparation, can be useful for you. But thank you for sharing that situation with us and asking that question. We are going to go ahead and draw to a close here because we are a couple minutes over our allotted time. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. I sincerely hope that this webinar and the Q&A were both beneficial for you. Really encourage you to check out some of our future webinars. We have some good ones coming up next week. On, let's see, Tuesday, January 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We actually have an external presenter coming in. Her name is Rachel Wells. She's presented with us one time previously and shared some really good information. This time she's going to be presenting on the topic of how to use leadership skills to accelerate your career. And then on Wednesday, January 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern, we have a webinar called Adopting and Maintaining a Healthy Mindset for Your Job Search. So thank you once again for joining us today. Sincerely hope that this was helpful for you. And I wish you all the best of luck in your job search. Take care.